A child's desperate plea echoes behind a locked door. The basement is cold, unfinished, and silent until the light goes out. Her stepmother smiles upstairs, pretending nothing happened. But then, the father's car pulls into the driveway early. He hears the faint sound of crying through the floor. He unlocks the door. He sees the truth. But the stepmother is ready, with excuses, with forged diaries, with a plan to take everything. Witnesses step forward. Hidden cameras reveal more than anyone imagined, and a courtroom becomes the battlefield where a child's voice must be strong enough to topple lies built on money and manipulation. Secrets. Betrayal. A father's fight for the daughter he almost lost. When the final gavel falls, will justice save the child, or will the lies win? Anastasia sat cross-legged on the plush carpet of her bedroom, humming softly as she brushed her doll's golden hair. Outside, rain tapped against the window in a gentle rhythm. The doll, worn from years of love, wore a blue dress that matched the one Anastasia's mother had given her before she went to heaven. 100 brush strokes makes your hair shine, she whispered to the doll, remembering how her mother used to say those same words while brushing her own hair at bedtime. The memory made her chest feel tight, but she kept counting anyway. 97. 98. Thunder crackled outside, making her jump. The brush clattered to the floor, rolling under her bed. Before she could reach for it, the door burst open. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her elegant figure casting a long shadow across the room. Her high heels clicked sharply against the hardwood as she entered, each step making Anastasia's shoulders inch higher. "What are you doing in here?" Vanessa's voice cut through the peaceful afternoon like ice. Her perfectly painted lips twisted into a frown as she surveyed the room. "Making a mess again, I see." Anastasia clutched her doll closer. "I'm just playing quietly, like you said to—" "Playing?" Vanessa's eyebrows arched. "Look at this room. Toys everywhere." She gestured at the single doll and brush on the floor. "Your father will be home soon, and I won't have him see this chaos." "I'll clean up right now," Anastasia promised, scrambling to her feet. Her small hands trembled as she reached for the fallen brush. "No." Vanessa's manicured fingers wrapped around Anastasia's arm, pulling her away from the toy. "You know where disobedient children go, don't you?" Anastasia's heart began to race. "Please, I'll be good. I promise. Downstairs, now." Vanessa's grip tightened as she steered Anastasia toward the door. "Can I bring my doll?" Anastasia's voice quivered. "Just to keep me company?" "Absolutely not." Vanessa snatched the doll from Anastasia's hands and tossed it onto the bed. "Maybe some time alone will teach you to appreciate the rules of this house." They descended the main staircase, Anastasia's feet dragging with each step. The basement door loomed before them, dark and heavy. Vanessa yanked it open, revealing the steep wooden stairs that disappeared into blackness below. "Please," Anastasia whispered, her whole body shaking now. "I don't like the dark." "You should have thought about that before misbehaving." Vanessa switched on the single bulb that hung from the ceiling, casting weak yellow light over the unfinished space. Anastasia's feet met the cold cement floor. The basement smelled of damp earth and old boxes. Cobwebs stretched between the exposed beams overhead, and shadows lurked in every corner. She turned back to look up at her stepmother, tears welling in her eyes. "How long do I have to stay down here?" "Until I decide you've learned your lesson." Vanessa's hand rested on the door handle. "And don't bother crying. No one can hear you down here. Please don't lock the door," Anastasia begged, her voice barely above a whisper. She could already feel the darkness pressing in around her, hungry and cold. The only response was the decisive click of the lock and the sound of Vanessa's heels clicking away above, leaving Anastasia alone in the dim light of the single bulb. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm in the dank basement air. The concrete floor leached the heat from her feet through her socks. In the corner, a spider scuttled across its web, making her shrink back against the wall. Thunder rumbled again outside, louder now. The sound vibrated through the foundation, making the lone light bulb swing slightly. Shadows danced across the walls, and Anastasia squeezed her eyes shut, pretending she was somewhere else, anywhere else. "Mommy," she whispered into the emptiness, "I miss you." Her voice caught on a sob. The light bulb flickered once, twice, and then went out with a soft pop, plunging the basement into complete darkness. Anastasia's breath caught in her throat as panic gripped her chest. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, drawing her knees up to her chest. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she curled into a tight ball on the cold cement floor. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in her memory as her sobs bounced off the basement walls, filling the darkness with her fear and loneliness. Winston Vanderbilt's Mercedes rolled up the curved driveway, its headlights cutting through the evening rain. The familiar sight of his mansion loomed before him, windows glowing amber against the darkening sky. After 2 weeks of non-stop meetings in London, all he wanted was to see his daughter's smile and hear her excited chatter about everything he'd missed. He turned off the engine, grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat, and made his way to the front door. His shoes crunched on wet gravel as rain dripped from the edges of his umbrella. The house key clicked in the lock, and his wheeled suitcase bumped against the doorframe as he stepped inside. "I'm home," his voice echoed through the marble foyer. No response came. No running footsteps. No gleeful shout of, "Daddy!" Just silence. Winston loosened his tie, frowning. Anastasia. Vanessa. The quiet felt wrong. Heavy, somehow. Usually, even at this hour, he could hear the TV from the living room or the clink of dishes from the kitchen. He set down his briefcase and checked his watch. 7:30 p.m. Too early for bed. The stillness made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. That's when he heard it. A muffled sound, so faint he almost missed it. He stood perfectly still, listening. There it was again, coming from beneath his feet. "Hello?" he called out, moving toward the center of the foyer. The sound grew clearer. Someone crying. Winston's heart started pounding. He followed the sound to the basement door, pressing his ear against the wood. The crying was definitely coming from down there. He tried the handle. Locked. "Anastasia?" His voice cracked with sudden fear. "Sweetheart, are you down there?" A small voice, thick with tears, called back. "Daddy? Is that really you?" Winston's hands shook as he fumbled with his keys. "I'm here, baby. I'm coming." He found the right key and yanked the door open, nearly pulling it off its hinges. The basement was pitch black. He groped for the light switch, but nothing happened when he flipped it. Pulling out his phone, he turned on the flashlight and hurried down the stairs, heart hammering against his ribs. The beam of light swept across the unfinished basement until it found her, his little girl huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was streaked with tears, her sock feet dirty from the concrete floor. "Oh, God! Anastasia!" Winston rushed to her, dropping to his knees on the cold cement. She launched herself into his arms, sobbing into his shoulder. She was shaking violently, her skin cold to the touch. "Daddy? You came back." Her small fingers clutched at his suit jacket. "I was so scared in the dark. How long have you been down here?" He wrapped his coat around her trembling shoulders, rage building in his chest. "Who did this to you?" Before she could answer, heels clicked on the stairs behind them. The overhead light suddenly blazed to life, making them both blink in the sudden brightness. "Winston! You're home early!" Vanessa stood at the bottom of the stairs, one hand still on the light switch. Her voice dripped with honey, but her eyes were sharp. "I've been looking everywhere for Anastasia. Thank goodness you found her." Winston stood slowly, keeping Anastasia cradled in his arms. She buried her face in his neck, refusing to look at her stepmother. "Looking for her." His voice was deadly quiet. The door was locked from the outside. Vanessa's perfectly painted lips formed a surprised "oh." Was it? Oh, that old door. It must have swung shut on its own. You know how these old houses can be. She took a step toward them, reaching for Anastasia. "Come here, darling. You must be hungry after your little adventure." Anastasia whimpered and pressed closer to her father. Winston turned slightly, shielding her from Vanessa's outstretched hand. "Don't!" The single word held enough ice to freeze the air between them. "Don't you dare touch her!" Vanessa withdrew her hand, her face a mask of concern. "Winston, surely you don't think—" "I would never harm her. She's like a daughter to me." She dabbed at her eyes with a manicured finger. "I've been sick with worry, searching the whole house." Winston looked down at his daughter, still trembling in his arms. Her socks were filthy, her face tear-stained, her lips slightly blue from cold. He pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "You're safe now, sweetheart. I promise. No one will ever hurt you again." Vanessa watched from the stairs, her performance of distress perfect, but something cold and calculating flickered behind her eyes. The basement light cast harsh shadows across her face as she stood there, witnessing the first crack in her carefully constructed facade. Winston carried Anastasia up the basement stairs, each step measured and deliberate. His daughter's small form felt so fragile in his arms, her trembling not yet subsided. In the brighter light of the kitchen, he could see the dust on her pink dress and the tear tracks that had dried on her cheeks. "Sit with me, sweetheart." He settled into one of the kitchen chairs, keeping her on his lap. She curled into him like a tiny bird seeking shelter. "Can you tell me what happened?" Before Anastasia could speak, Vanessa glided into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Oh, don't fuss so much, darling." She waved her hand dismissively. "We were just playing a game, weren't we, Anastasia?" Winston felt his daughter stiffen at the sound of her stepmother's voice. He rubbed small circles on her back, trying to ease her tension. "A game?" His voice was quiet, but sharp. "What kind of game involves locking a child in a dark basement?" Vanessa's laugh tinkled like crystal. "You make it sound so dramatic. She loves playing house down there. Don't you, sweetie?" She leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. "Tell Daddy how much fun we were having." Anastasia pressed her face deeper into Winston's chest, her small hands clutching his shirt. He could feel her heart racing. She wanted to set up a little playhouse in the basement. Vanessa's smile never wavered as she pulled out a chair and sat down, smoothing her silk blouse. She was so excited about it. You know how children are with their imagination. The door must have stuck when she closed it. These old houses can be so temperamental. Winston looked down at his daughter's dirty socks, at the way she trembled despite the warmth of the kitchen. Something wasn't adding up. "Is that true, Anastasia? Did you want to play in the basement?" Anastasia lifted her head slightly, just enough to peek at Vanessa. The stepmother's smile remained perfect, but her eyes had turned hard as marbles. Anastasia's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't want to go down there. It's dark and scary and—" She hiccuped, fresh tears spilling. "She said I was bad, that bad girls have to be punished." "Anastasia!" Vanessa's voice sharpened before she caught herself. She pressed a hand to her chest, expression wounded. "How can you say such things? Winston, surely you don't believe these stories. You know how children can exaggerate." Winston felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched his wife's performance. He'd seen that same practiced charm in boardrooms when CEOs tried to hide trouble behind polished smiles. Looking at her now, he wondered how he'd missed it before. "The light switch didn't work when I tried it," he said carefully, watching her face. "But you knew exactly where it was when you came down." "Pure coincidence," Vanessa replied smoothly. "I must have hit it by accident." "And the door being locked from the outside? As I said, it must have. A knock at the front door cut through their conversation. 3 soft, hesitant taps. Vanessa stood quickly. I'll get it. It's rather late for visitors, isn't it? No. Winston's voice was firm. I'll answer it. Stay here. He stood, settling Anastasia gently in the chair. I'll be right back, sweetheart. I promise. He strode to the front door, straightening his tie out of habit. When he opened it, he found a small boy standing on the porch, clutching a worn teddy bear. The child couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, with unruly brown hair and earnest eyes. Can I help you? Winston asked, softening his voice for the clearly nervous child. The boy shifted from foot to foot, squeezing his teddy bear tighter. I live next door. I'm Caden. He glanced over his shoulder at his house, then back at Winston. Is Anastasia okay? Winston knelt down to the boy's level. Do you know my daughter? Caden nodded. We play sometimes when she's allowed outside. He bit his lip, gathering courage. I saw everything today. Through my bedroom window. What did you see, Caden? The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. Mrs. Vanderbilt was really mad. She grabbed Anastasia's arm real hard and pushed her toward the basement. Anastasia was crying, begging her not to lock her in, but... He hugged his teddy bear closer. Mrs. Vanderbilt said mean things, really mean things. Then she locked the door and turned off the power switch outside. Winston felt his hands curl into fists. He forced them to relax, not wanting to frighten the boy. Thank you for telling me this, Caden. That was very brave of you. I wanted to help sooner. Caden's eyes welled up, but I was scared. Then I saw your car come back, and I knew I had to tell you. Anastasia's my friend. From the kitchen, Winston heard the sharp sound of a chair scraping against the floor, followed by Vanessa's voice calling out with forced cheerfulness. Who is it, darling? Would you like to come in? Winston asked Caden quietly. I think Anastasia could use a friend right now. The boy nodded, clutching his teddy bear like a shield as he stepped into the foyer. Behind them, Vanessa's heels clicked on the hardwood, coming closer. Why, if it isn't little Caden from next door, she said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes flashing with something dangerous. What brings you here so late? Caden's small fingers twisted the ear of his teddy bear as he spoke, his voice growing steadier with each word. I was doing my homework by the window when I heard yelling. He glanced nervously at Vanessa before turning back to Winston. Mrs. Vanderbilt was dragging Anastasia across the yard. She kept saying she'd teach her a lesson. Winston placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling him tremble. Go on, Caden. It's okay. Anastasia was crying, begging to stay upstairs. Caden's grip on his bear tightened. But Mrs. Vanderbilt said, bad girls deserve the dark. She pushed her so hard that Anastasia fell down the stairs. I heard her crying all the way from my room. Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails dug into the doorframe. What an active imagination you have, young man. Her voice dripped with venom barely disguised as sweetness. Perhaps your parents should know you're spreading such horrible lies about adults. They're not lies. Caden's voice cracked, but he stood straighter. You went to the power box outside first. I saw you flip the switches before you locked her in. You wanted it to be dark down there. Winston felt his blood run cold. That explained why the lights hadn't worked when he first entered the basement. He turned to Vanessa, seeing her differently now. The careful makeup, the practiced smile, the calculated gestures. It all seemed grotesque, like a beautiful mask hiding something rotten. Winston, surely you don't believe this child over your own wife? Vanessa stepped forward, reaching for his arm. He pulled away. Don't. His voice was quiet but firm. Don't touch me. The change in Vanessa was instant and chilling. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure fury. Her eyes, usually warm brown, seemed to turn black with rage. You ungrateful child! She spun toward Caden, who stumbled backward. "How dare you come into my home and tell such vicious lies?" "They're not lies," came a small voice from the kitchen doorway. Anastasia stood there, her dirty pink dress a stark contrast to the polished marble floor. "You said if I told Daddy, you'd lock me down there forever." Winston's heart clenched at his daughter's words. How long had this been going on? How many business trips had he taken, leaving his precious child in the hands of this monster? "You little brat." Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut like ice. "After everything I've done for you, living in this mansion, wearing expensive clothes, attending the best school, and this is how you repay me? By everything? Do you mean terrorizing my 7-year-old daughter?" Winston stepped between Vanessa and the children, locking her in a dark basement? Threatening her? Vanessa's laugh was sharp and ugly. Someone had to discipline her. "You're never here. Always at your precious meetings, flying around the world." She needed a firm hand. She needed love. Winston's voice shook with controlled anger. She needed care and protection. Instead, I married a woman who hurt her, who betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. "Oh, please." Vanessa rolled her eyes, all pretense of refinement gone. "The girl is spoiled rotten, just like her mother was, always wanting attention, always in the way of real success." Winston felt his hands curl into fists. "Don't you dare speak about her mother. I'll speak about whatever I want." Vanessa's voice rose to a shriek. "This is my house now, my life, my future, and I won't let some sniveling child or nosy neighbor ruin everything I've worked for." "Your house?" Winston's laugh was cold. "Your future? The prenup you signed says otherwise, Vanessa. You get nothing if this marriage ends due to misconduct. And what you've done to my daughter?" He pulled out his phone. "That's more than misconduct. That's abuse." Vanessa's face went pale. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Winston dialed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Yes, police, please. I need to report a case of child abuse." Vanessa lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, but Winston stepped back. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll tell them you're an absent father, that you neglect her." That what?" Winston's voice was steel. "That you locked a 7-year-old in a dark basement as punishment? That you threatened her? That we have an eyewitness to your cruelty?" He nodded toward Caden, who still stood bravely beside Anastasia. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. She snatched her purse from the entryway table. "This isn't over," she spat, yanking open the front door. "You'll hear from my lawyer." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the sudden silence, Winston heard a small sniffle. He turned to find Anastasia crying quietly, her small shoulders shaking. "Come here, sweetheart." He knelt down, opening his arms. She ran to him, burying her face in his shoulder. "You're safe now. I promise." After giving his statement to the police and thanking Caden and his parents, who had come to collect him, Winston spent the evening making sure Anastasia felt secure. He read her 3 bedtime stories, checked under the bed twice for monsters, and left her nightlight on its brightest setting. Now, standing at his study window, he watched the last police car pull away from the curb. The house was quiet, but his mind was racing. He knew Vanessa wouldn't give up easily. She would fight. For money, for status, maybe even for custody just to hurt him. The moon cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, reminding him of the darkness his daughter had faced alone. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his reflection grim in the window pane. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Golden sunlight streamed through the bay windows of the breakfast room, casting warm patterns across the marble countertops. The sweet aroma of vanilla and maple syrup filled the air as Winston stood at the stovetop, spatula in hand. He watched the pancake batter bubble, waiting for the perfect moment to flip. Anastasia sat at the kitchen island, her legs swinging freely from the high stool. Her hair was still slightly damp from her morning shower, tied back in two slightly uneven pigtails she'd insisted on doing herself. She wore her favorite weekend outfit, purple leggings and a sparkly unicorn t-shirt that had seen better days. "Is it ready to flip yet, Daddy?" she asked, leaning forward to peek at the pan. Winston smiled, remembering how his own father had taught him the secret to perfect pancakes. "Almost, sweetheart. See these little bubbles forming? When they pop and leave tiny holes, that's when we know." "Like now," Anastasia pointed excitedly. "Exactly like now." With a practiced flick of his wrist, Winston flipped the pancake, revealing a perfect golden brown surface. Anastasia clapped her hands in delight. "Can I have this one?" She bounced in her seat. "Please?" "Of course." Winston slid the pancake onto her waiting plate. "Would you like blueberries on top?" Anastasia nodded enthusiastically. "And whipped cream?" "And whipped cream," Winston agreed, reaching for the can in the fridge. He drew a smiley face on her pancake with the cream, adding blueberries for eyes. Anastasia's giggle echoed through the kitchen, a sound he hadn't heard in far too long. As they ate together, Winston noticed how his daughter seemed lighter, more animated. She told him about her art project at school, about the new library books she wanted to read, about everything and nothing. Her words tumbled out in a happy stream, as if making up for all the silence that had filled these rooms before. Between bites of pancake, Winston reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. James Mitchell, his longtime friend and legal counsel. "I need to make a quick call, sweetheart," he said, standing up. "Will you be okay for a minute?" Anastasia nodded, her mouth full of pancake. Winston stepped into his study, but left the door open so he could still see her. "James? It's Winston Vanderbilt." He kept his voice low but firm. "I need your help with an annulment. Yes, it's serious. She's been abusing my daughter." His hand tightened on the phone as he briefly outlined the previous day's events. James's response was immediate and reassuring. "I'll clear my morning schedule. Come to my office at 10. We'll start the paperwork immediately." Relief flooded through Winston. "Thank you, James. I'll be there." When he returned to the breakfast room, Anastasia was carefully arranging her remaining blueberries into a heart shape on her plate. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" Winston sat down beside her, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Everything is going to be just fine, sweetheart. I promise I'm going to fix this. No one will ever hurt you again." "Never, ever?" Her big brown eyes searched his face. "Never, ever." He pulled her into a tight hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. "From now on, it's just you and me. We're going to make this house happy again." After breakfast, they spent the morning together. Winston called his office to clear his schedule for the week, delegating urgent matters to his capable team. While he spoke with James at the law office, Mrs. Parker, their kind-hearted housekeeper who had known Anastasia since birth, stayed with his daughter, baking cookies and telling stories. The day passed in a gentle rhythm of small, healing moments. They had lunch in the garden, feeding breadcrumbs to the birds. Winston helped Anastasia with her homework, marveling at how quickly she grasped her multiplication tables. They played board games in the living room, and he let her win at Candyland twice. As evening approached, Winston prepared Anastasia's favorite dinner, mac and cheese, with little bits of hot dog cut into stars. She ate every bite, chattering about the cookie recipe Mrs. Parker had taught her. Bath time was followed by their new bedtime routine. Anastasia chose her softest pajamas, the ones with little clouds all over them, and climbed into bed clutching her worn teddy bear. "Which story would you like tonight?" Winston asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. The nightlight cast a warm, protective glow across the room. Anastasia pointed to The Velveteen Rabbit on her bookshelf. "That one, please." Winston read slowly, doing all the voices just the way she liked. Anastasia's eyes grew heavy as he turned the pages, but she fought to stay awake, her small hand holding tight to his. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you." Winston's voice was soft and steady as he read the familiar words. By the time he reached the part about the rabbit becoming real through love, Anastasia's breathing had deepened into sleep. Still, Winston continued reading, his free hand holding hers, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her chest. He sat there long after the story was finished, guarding his daughter's dreams. The moonlight filtered through her curtains, and in that quiet moment, Winston made a silent vow. He would never again let work or anything else come before her safety and happiness. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them together. Over the next few days, Winston's laptop remained closed more often than open. His phone, usually buzzing with constant notifications, stayed silent in his pocket. The mansion's quiet halls began to fill with a daughter's laughter and a father's answering chuckles. On Tuesday morning, Winston sat at his desk, carefully reviewing his packed calendar. With determined clicks, he began canceling meetings and rescheduling commitments. His assistant's surprised voice came through the speakerphone. "Cancel the Tokyo trip entirely?" Sarah asked. "But sir, the merger—" "The merger can wait," Winston replied firmly. "Or they can send their representatives here. I'm not leaving the country right now." His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk. Anastasia at age 5, missing her front teeth, beaming at the camera. Family comes first. Later that morning, Winston took Anastasia to Riverside Park. The spring air was crisp and clean after the recent rain. Anastasia skipped ahead on the path, her purple backpack bouncing with each step. She had insisted on bringing her sketchbook and colored pencils. "Look, Daddy!" She pointed to a family of ducks paddling in the pond. "Can we feed them?" Winston pulled a small bag of proper duck feed from his jacket. He'd done his research the night before about what was safe for the birds. "Here you go, sweetheart. Just throw it gently." They spent an hour by the pond, Anastasia carefully sketching the ducks while Winston sat beside her on a weathered wooden bench. He watched her tongue stick out slightly in concentration as she worked on getting the duckling's feet just right. "Would you like to get some ice cream?" Winston asked as she finished her drawing. Anastasia's eyes lit up. "From Mr. Giovanni's?" "Of course." Winston smiled, remembering how the old Italian ice cream maker always snuck an extra scoop into Anastasia's cup when he thought no one was looking. At the ice cream parlor, Anastasia chose strawberry with rainbow sprinkles, while Winston had his usual vanilla. They sat at their favorite table by the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. "Daddy?" Anastasia swirled her spoon through the melting ice cream. "Can we do this every day?" Winston reached across the table to wipe a spot of pink from her chin. "Well, maybe not ice cream every day," he said with a wink, "but we'll definitely spend more time together. I promise." That afternoon, Winston set up his laptop in the garden while Anastasia played nearby. He answered urgent emails between pushing her on the swing set and admiring the fairy house she built from twigs and leaves. His corporate efficiency might have dropped, but his happiness soared. Wednesday brought a tea party in Anastasia's room, complete with her stuffed animals as guests. Winston sat cross-legged on the carpet, pinky extended as he sipped imaginary tea from a tiny plastic cup. He learned the names of all her plush friends and their favorite make-believe cookies. On Thursday, they baked real cookies together. The kitchen ended up dusted with flour, and the first batch came out slightly burned, but Anastasia declared them perfectly imperfect. Winston found himself covered in chocolate smudges and not minding one bit. Friday morning, Winston joined Anastasia's art class as a parent volunteer. He helped distribute supplies and watched in amazement as his daughter taught him the proper way to mix watercolors. Her teacher mentioned how much more confident Anastasia seemed lately, how her smile reached her eyes again. Each night, their bedtime routine grew more elaborate. Stories weren't just read, but performed, with Winston doing silly voices for each character. Anastasia's giggles became the sweetest lullaby he'd ever heard. Through it all, Winston rediscovered pieces of himself he'd forgotten. The father who could spend hours building blanket forts, the man who knew all the words to Disney songs, the daddy who could chase away monsters with just a hug. His phone still buzzed occasionally with business matters, but now he handled them differently. Video conferences were scheduled during Anastasia's school hours. Documents were reviewed after bedtime. The world's demands no longer overshadowed his daughter's needs. From the mansion's upper window, Vanessa watched their growing closeness with mounting rage. She stood behind heavy curtains, perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms, as she observed them returning from another afternoon outing. Anastasia was showing Winston something in her sketchbook, and his genuine laugh carried across the garden. "So sweet," Vanessa whispered to herself, her voice dripping with venom. "Such a perfect little family." Her reflection in the window glass showed lips pressed into a thin line, eyes cold with calculation. "But I won't be cast aside so easily." Vanessa sat at her mahogany desk, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the polished surface. The morning light caught her wedding ring, making it sparkle, a ring she had no intention of giving up. She pulled out her leather planner and began to write, her handwriting precise and controlled. "Dear Diary," she wrote, dating the entry from 3 months ago. "Another night alone with Anastasia while Winston works late. She cried for her father again, but he didn't even call to say good night. 4th time this week." She continued crafting entries, carefully aging the paper with coffee stains and deliberate wrinkles. Each page told a story of a devoted stepmother struggling to care for a neglected child. She documented fictional late nights, missed school events, and tearful bedtimes, all blamed on Winston's absence. "It's for the best," she murmured, blowing gently on the ink to dry it. "Someone needs to protect the poor dear from such negligent parenting." At the country club that afternoon, Vanessa held court at her usual table, surrounded by her carefully cultivated circle of socialites. She stirred her tea with practiced grace, her voice soft with manufactured concern. "It just breaks my heart," she confided to Mrs. Henderson, whose husband sat on the school board. "Winston means well, but you know how these business types are. Always another meeting, another trip." She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "That poor child." Mrs. Henderson leaned in, hungry for gossip. "But surely he's trying. I've seen them at the park recently." "Oh, that's new," Vanessa said, waving her hand dismissively. "Guilt, you see. After I confronted him about missing her piano recital last month, she played so beautifully. But her own father?" She let her voice trail off meaningfully. The whispers spread through the club like ripples in a pond. By the time Vanessa finished her tea, concerned glances followed her path to the door, just as she planned. At home, she moved to the next phase. She gathered school records, carefully adding notes about missed parent-teacher conferences and unsigned permission slips. Her forgeries were masterful, the product of years of practice. Each document built a picture of a distant, workaholic father. In her private study, Vanessa made calls to carefully selected contacts. Her voice changed for each one worried teacher, concerned neighbor, distressed friend of the family. Each conversation planted seeds of doubt about Winston's parenting. "I just don't know who else to talk to," she whispered to a social worker she'd befriended at a charity gala. "I try to compensate for his absence, but a child needs her father." She hired a private investigator to document Winston's past travel schedule, building a thick file of business trips and late nights at the office. The fact that these were mostly from before their marriage was a detail she conveniently omitted. One afternoon, while Winston and Anastasia were at the park, Vanessa met with her lawyer in a discreet cafe downtown. Marcus Webb was expensive, but his reputation for aggressive custody battles made him worth every penny. "The evidence is compelling," Webb said, reviewing her documents. The work history alone shows a pattern of prioritizing business over family. And these diary entries? He nodded appreciatively. Very thorough. I just want what's best for Anastasia, Vanessa said, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. Someone needs to put her first. They spent 2 hours planning strategy. Webb explained how they would file motions contesting custody, positioning Vanessa as the stable, nurturing presence in Anastasia's life. They would emphasize Winston's demanding career, his frequent travels, his history of choosing work over family. The courts favor stability, Webb assured her. A present parent over an absent one. We'll file first thing Monday morning. Over the next few days, Vanessa kept her distance from Winston and Anastasia, playing the part of the concerned but powerless observer. She made sure others noticed her apparent distress, her quiet worry. She was building a reputation as a sacrificing stepmother, forced to watch helplessly as a child suffered neglect. She scheduled meetings with child welfare advocates, sharing carefully edited stories of Winston's parenting. Each conversation added another layer to her fabricated narrative. She even arranged for anonymous complaints to be filed with family services. The legal machinery began to move. Motions were filed, hearings scheduled. Vanessa watched with hidden satisfaction as her plan took shape, like a spider feeling the first tremors in its web. One evening, as Winston and Anastasia were finishing dinner, the doorbell rang. Vanessa positioned herself at the top of the stairs, where she could observe without being obvious. A court officer stood in the doorway, holding an official envelope. Mr. Winston Vanderbilt? The officer's voice was professionally neutral. This is to notify you of a temporary custody hearing scheduled for next week. Please review these documents carefully. Winston's face paled as he accepted the envelope, his hand trembling slightly. From her vantage point, Vanessa allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The snake had struck, and now the venom would begin to work. The county courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps worn by decades of footsteps seeking justice. Winston held Anastasia's small hand tightly as they climbed toward the heavy wooden doors. His lawyer, James Mitchell, walked beside them, briefcase in hand, his face set with determination. Inside the courtroom, morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. The air felt thick with tension. Winston helped Anastasia settle into her seat, smoothing her carefully chosen blue dress. She looked so small, so vulnerable in the vast room. Vanessa swept in moments later, the perfect picture of refined concern. Her navy suit was expertly tailored, her makeup flawless, her honey blonde hair arranged in elegant waves. She carried herself with the practiced grace of someone who had spent a lifetime in country clubs and charity galas. Judge Warren McCord entered, his black robes rustling as he took his seat. His stern face betrayed nothing as he surveyed the courtroom, but his eyes lingered for a moment on Anastasia. Your Honor, Vanessa's lawyer began, rising smoothly to his feet. We're here today because a child's welfare hangs in the balance. My client has documented serious concerns about Mr. Vanderbilt's ability to provide consistent care and emotional support for his daughter. Vanessa took the stand first, her performance masterfully choreographed. She dabbed at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief as she spoke. I tried so hard to compensate for Winston's absences, she said, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. The nights Anastasia would cry herself to sleep, asking why Daddy missed another school play, another parent-teacher conference. She produced her doctored diary, pages carefully dog-eared and tear-stained. I kept track of everything, she explained, passing it to the judge. I thought maybe if I showed Winston the pattern, he would understand how his choices were affecting our dear girl. Winston's jaw clenched as he watched the judge flip through the fraudulent pages. He knew every entry was a lie, but they were crafted with such attention to detail, such seemingly authentic emotion. Next came the parade of witnesses Vanessa had cultivated. Mrs. Henderson from the country club spoke of overheard conversations about missed events. A teaching assistant mentioned unsigned permission slips and homework folders. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a damning picture of parental neglect. When Winston finally took the stand, he spoke with quiet intensity. "Yes, I traveled for business," he admitted. "I built my company from nothing, working to provide the best life possible for my daughter. But I've changed. I've rearranged everything to be present for Anastasia." "Recent changes," Vanessa's lawyer countered, "conveniently timed with these proceedings. But what about the years of documented absence? The missed milestones? The pattern of choosing business over family?" He produced thick folders of Winston's travel records, email correspondence about late meetings, calendar entries showing overseas trips. "This is the reality of Mr. Vanderbilt's commitment to parenting," the lawyer declared. "A few weeks of playing devoted father doesn't erase years of neglect." Judge McCord studied the documents carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Winston's heart sank as he watched doubt creep into the judge's eyes. "Your Honor," Winston's lawyer argued, "my client has made substantial changes to his schedule. He's working from home, has canceled all non-essential travel." "After the fact," Vanessa's lawyer interrupted, "after being confronted with his failures as a parent. Is this genuine change, or merely a temporary performance for the court's benefit?" The judge's gaze moved between Winston and Vanessa, weighing each detail, each piece of evidence. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with authority. "The court's primary concern must be the child's welfare," Judge McCord declared. "While Mr. Vanderbilt's recent efforts are noted, the extensive documentation of his past behavior cannot be ignored. Stability and consistent presence are crucial for a child's development." Winston's heart hammered in his chest. He reached for Anastasia's hand, holding it tight as the judge continued. "Therefore, pending full investigation and final custody determination, this court grants temporary guardianship to Mrs. Vanderbilt." The gavel struck with devastating finality. "No!" Anastasia's cry pierced the formal atmosphere. "Daddy, please!" Winston stood, helpless, as Vanessa approached to collect Anastasia. Tears spilled down his cheeks as his daughter reached for him, her small hands grasping at air. "Daddy, don't let her take me!" Anastasia's voice cracked with desperation as Vanessa led her toward the courtroom doors. Winston remained frozen in place, his world crumbling as he watched his daughter being led away, her sobs echoing off the courthouse walls. The tears in his eyes blurred the sight of her reaching back toward him, her face a mask of confusion and fear. The heavy doors closed behind them, cutting off Anastasia's cries, leaving Winston standing alone in the suddenly silent courtroom, his tears falling freely now as the magnitude of what had just happened crashed over him like a wave. The grandfather clock in Winston's study struck 9, each chime echoing through the empty halls of the mansion. He sat at his mahogany desk, head in his hands, the events of the day playing over and over in his mind like a cruel movie he couldn't stop. Moonlight spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the room. His daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit lay forgotten on the window seat where she'd left it that morning, its floppy ears seeming to droop with sadness. Next to it, her coloring books remained open, crayon drawings half finished, waiting for their artist to return. Winston's throat tightened. The house felt wrong without Anastasia's laughter, without the patter of her small feet running down the hallways. The silence pressed in on him like a physical weight. He lifted his head, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. No more tears, no more helplessness. Action was needed now, not grief. Opening his laptop, Winston began methodically creating folders, organizing his thoughts. He needed evidence, real, concrete proof of Vanessa's true nature. The neighbor child's testimony would be crucial, but it couldn't stand alone. He reached for his phone, scrolling through months of text messages between himself and Vanessa. There, hints of her controlling behavior, subtle threats when she didn't get her way. He took screenshots, saving each one carefully. Next came the security cameras. Winston had installed them throughout the house after his late wife's passing, wanting to ensure Anastasia's safety when he traveled. He'd never imagined they would serve this purpose. His hands trembled slightly as he accessed the footage archives. Hours of video began playing across his screen. The transformation in Vanessa's behavior when she thought no one was watching was chilling. Here she was, roughly grabbing Anastasia's arm when the child reached for a cookie. There, berating the girl for leaving toys in the living room, her elegant face twisted with anger. Winston's stomach churned as he watched. How had he missed these signs? How had he let this woman into their lives? He created a timeline, marking each incident with clinical precision. The basement incident. The accidents that seemed to happen whenever Anastasia earned praise or attention. The way Vanessa would lock away the girl's art supplies as punishment, knowing how much Anastasia loved to draw. A soft knock at the study door startled him. Martha, their housekeeper for the past decade, stood in the doorway, her kind face lined with concern. "Mr. Vanderbilt?" she said softly. "I've brought you some coffee." And she hesitated, then stepped forward with determination. "I want to help. I've seen things, sir. Things I should have reported sooner." Winston gestured for her to sit. Martha had been with them since before his first wife's passing, had helped raise Anastasia. Her testimony would carry weight. For the next hour, Martha detailed everything she'd witnessed. Vanessa's cruel comments when she thought no one could hear. The accidents that always seemed to happen to Anastasia's favorite possessions. The way the child had grown increasingly withdrawn and fearful. Winston recorded every word, his lawyer's training taking over as he asked precise questions, establishing dates and times. Martha's steady voice grew thick with emotion as she described finding Anastasia hiding in the laundry room one afternoon, trembling after one of Vanessa's rages. When Martha finished, Winston thanked her, watching as she wiped tears from her eyes before leaving the study. He added her statement to his growing file of evidence. The clock struck 11. Winston rubbed his tired eyes, then reached for his phone again. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the neighbors whose son had witnessed Vanessa's cruelty. Despite the late hour, Mr. Smith answered on the second ring. "Winston, is everything all right?" "John, I apologize for calling so late," Winston said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But I need your help. Your son saw what Vanessa did to Anastasia. Would you and Sarah be willing to provide sworn testimony about what he told you?" There was a pause, then the sound of a door closing as John Smith moved to a private room. "Of course," he said firmly. "Sarah and I have been sick about this all day. We should have spoken up sooner when we noticed things weren't right." "Tomorrow morning," Winston said, checking his calendar. "My lawyer can meet with you at 9 to take your statements. Your son's testimony, if he's willing, it could make all the difference." "He's willing," John assured him. "He's been worried about Anastasia. Sarah and I will bring him to your lawyer's office first thing tomorrow. We'll do whatever it takes to help make this right, Winston." Winston's grip tightened on the phone. "Thank you, John. I can't tell you what this means." After ending the call, Winston sat back in his chair, feeling the first stirring of hope since the devastating court ruling. The evidence was mounting. Vanessa's carefully constructed facade would crumble under the weight of truth. He looked again at Anastasia's abandoned toys, her half-finished drawings. "Hold on, sweetheart," he whispered into the quiet room. "Daddy's coming for you." The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Winston's home office as he methodically arranged evidence into neat piles. Security camera footage played silently on one monitor while he reviewed documentation on another. Dark circles under his eyes, betrayed nights of relentless work, but determination burned bright in his gaze. Martha appeared at his door with a fresh cup of coffee, setting it beside a stack of printed photos. The investigator called, sir. He's found 3 former housekeepers willing to testify about Mrs. Vanderbilt's behavior. Winston nodded, adding another note to his growing file. Thank you, Martha. And thank you for staying late again last night to help organize all this. His desk had become a command center of sorts. Labeled folders contained printed screenshots of text messages, security footage stills, and sworn statements. A timeline covered one wall, marking every incident with clinical precision. Each piece of evidence was a weapon in his arsenal, carefully documented and cross-referenced. The supervised visits with Anastasia were both a blessing and a torture. Twice a week, in a sterile office downtown, he got to spend 1 hour with his daughter, while a court-appointed supervisor watched their every move. Vanessa had insisted on these restrictions, claiming Winston might try to poison the child against her. During yesterday's visit, Anastasia had seemed quieter than usual, her small shoulders tense. While they worked on a puzzle together, she'd slipped him a folded paper, carefully hidden in her sleeve. Later, alone in his car, Winston had read the childish handwriting through tears. Daddy, she took away my bunny because I asked for you at bedtime. She says I can't have any toys until I stop crying for you. He'd added the note to his evidence file, his hands shaking with barely contained rage. The neighbor boy's testimony had proven invaluable. In his innocent, straightforward way, he'd described multiple instances of seeing Vanessa being cruel to Anastasia through his bedroom window. His parents had provided additional context, recounting times they'd heard shouting or seen Anastasia hiding in their garden, too afraid to go home. Winston's lawyer called every morning with updates. The investigation was building momentum. 3 child psychologists had evaluated Anastasia, and their reports painted a clear picture of a child experiencing trauma. One had noted how Anastasia grew visibly anxious at the mere mention of returning to Vanessa. Security footage from the mansion revealed a pattern of escalating abuse. Vanessa's mask slipped whenever she thought no one was watching. The cameras caught her destroying Anastasia's artwork, locking away her toys, and berating the child for minor infractions, like leaving a book on the coffee table. More disturbing were the financial records Winston's accountant had uncovered. Large transfers from the family accounts to offshore holdings, documents with suspiciously perfect signatures, attempts to alter trust fund arrangements. Vanessa's careful planning suggested this had been her goal all along. During another supervised visit, Anastasia had drawn him a picture. At first glance, it seemed like a typical child's drawing of her home, but she'd colored the basement pitch black, with a tiny figure huddled in the corner. "This is where the bad things happen," she'd whispered, before the supervisor called time. Winston kept the drawing in a special folder, separate from the other evidence. Some things were too painful to look at more than once. Martha and the new housekeeping staff documented everything now. Every harsh word, every slammed door, every time Anastasia went to bed without dinner for some manufactured transgression. The reports painted a picture of calculated cruelty, of a woman systematically breaking down a child's spirit. Winston worked through another weekend, barely sleeping. His lawyer called with updates about court dates and procedural requirements. The evidence mounted. Witness statements accumulated. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Finally, on a crisp Tuesday morning, the call he'd been waiting for came through. The court had set a date for both the annulment proceedings and the custody hearing. They would be held together, given the interconnected nature of the cases. That afternoon's supervised visit felt different. Anastasia ran to him as always, but today he noticed she stood a little straighter, smiled a little more freely. Perhaps she sensed the shift in the air, the gathering momentum of justice. They sat together on the floor of the visitation room, working on a new puzzle. Anastasia's small hands sorted through the pieces, while Winston watched her, his heart full of love and fierce protectiveness. "Sweetheart," he said softly, making sure the supervisor couldn't overhear. He knelt beside her, pretending to help with a particularly tricky puzzle piece. "I need you to be brave for just a little while longer." Anastasia looked up at him, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Are you going to make the bad things stop, Daddy?" Winston squeezed her hand gently, his voice firm with conviction. "This time, we win." The supervisor called time before Anastasia could respond, but Winston saw the hope bloom in her eyes. She hugged him tightly before leaving, and he held on to that warmth as he watched her walk away. Back in his study that evening, Winston reviewed the evidence one final time. Each document, each photo, each statement formed another link in an unbreakable chain of truth. The court date loomed ahead like a beacon of hope, promising an end to their nightmare. The courtroom hummed with tension as Judge Warren McCord settled into his high-backed chair. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Winston sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer arranging documents with methodical precision. Vanessa glided in through the heavy wooden doors, her designer heels clicking against marble. She wore a carefully chosen cream-colored suit that screamed both innocence and wealth. A practiced smile graced her lips as she nodded to several spectators, playing every inch the wronged society wife. "All rise!" the bailiff called out. "The Superior Court of the state is now in session, the Honorable Judge Warren McCord presiding." As everyone settled back into their seats, Winston's eyes drifted to where Anastasia sat with Martha in the front row. His daughter wore her blue dress, the one she said made her feel brave, and clutched her restored stuffed bunny tightly. Vanessa's lawyer opened with flourish, painting a picture of a devoted stepmother desperately trying to provide stability to a child whose father was constantly absent. He waved documents showing Winston's extensive business travel, emphasizing dates and times away from home. Winston's lawyer, James Mitchell, remained unruffled. When his turn came, he approached the bench with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mrs. Vanderbilt's claims are not only false, but mask a pattern of calculated abuse and financial manipulation." He started with the security footage. On the courtroom screen, crystal-clear images showed Vanessa's transformation whenever she thought herself unobserved. The shallow warmth vanishing, replaced by cold fury as she berated Anastasia for minor infractions. The basement door closing, the lock turning. Anastasia's toys being thrown away while she was at school. Vanessa's smile grew strained. Her lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence kept mounting. The neighbor boy, Caden, took the stand next. Despite his obvious nervousness, his voice remained steady as he described what he'd witnessed through his bedroom window. "I saw Mrs. Vanderbilt push Anastasia really hard," he said, twisting his hands in his lap but maintaining eye contact with Judge McCord. "She fell down and started crying, but Mrs. Vanderbilt just walked away." 3 former housekeepers testified about Vanessa's cruelty when Winston traveled, the withheld meals, the locked doors, the endless punishments for imagined offenses. Their consistent accounts built a damning portrait. The financial evidence came next. Winston's accountant detailed suspicious transfers and altered documents, revealing Vanessa's systematic attempts to gain control of family assets. Her lawyer's objections grew increasingly desperate. Then came the moment Winston had both anticipated and dreaded. The judge called Anastasia to the stand. She looked tiny in the massive witness chair, her feet barely touching the footrest. But her spine was straight, and she held her bunny close as she was sworn in. "Anastasia," Judge McCord said gently, "can you tell us about living with your stepmother?" The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Winston held his breath. Anastasia's voice came out small but clear. "She hurts me when Daddy's not home. she said simply. She says it's our secret. But I don't like secrets that make me scared. A collective intake of breath from the gallery. Judge McCord's expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened on his pen. She locks me in the basement when I cry for Daddy, Anastasia continued, her lower lip trembling but her voice steady. It's dark down there, and I can hear the scary noises. I asked her, please don't. But she says I deserve it for being bad. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she wiped them away with determined dignity. I just want to go home with my daddy. He makes me feel safe. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Even Vanessa's practiced mask had cracked, showing the fury beneath. Judge McCord cleared his throat, his voice grave. I've heard enough. He turned his steely gaze to Vanessa. The evidence presented here today shows a clear pattern of abuse, manipulation, and fraudulent behavior. He lifted his gavel. This court hereby grants the petition for annulment on grounds of fraud and misconduct. Furthermore, full custody of the minor child, Anastasia Vanderbilt, is awarded to her father, Winston Vanderbilt. Mrs. Vanderbilt is stripped of all visitation rights and barred from any contact with the child. The gavel struck with finality. Vanessa shot to her feet, her composure finally shattering. You can't do this to me, she shrieked, her carefully made-up face contorting. I deserve… Mrs. Vanderbilt, Judge McCord cut in sharply. Remove yourself from my courtroom before I have you removed. Vanessa snatched up her designer purse, her heels striking the floor like angry exclamation points as she stormed toward the exit. She paused at the doors, turning back with venom in her eyes, but a stern look from the bailiff sent her spinning away. The heavy doors slammed behind her, and suddenly the courtroom felt lighter, as if a shadow had lifted. Afternoon sunshine spilled through the mansion's windows as Winston and Anastasia stood hand in hand at the top of the basement stairs. The door that had once been a source of terror now waited before them, its dark wood no longer menacing in the warm light. Are you ready, sweetheart? Winston asked softly, giving her small hand a gentle squeeze. Anastasia nodded, clutching her favorite paintbrush in her free hand. I'm not scared anymore, Daddy. Together, they descended the stairs. Winston flipped the light switch, and bare bulbs flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the cement floor and unfinished walls. But today, those shadows held no power. They were just shapes waiting to be transformed. First things first, Winston said, setting down the bucket of cleaning supplies he'd brought. Let's make this space sparkle. They worked side by side, scrubbing away months of dust and cobwebs. Winston showed Anastasia how to make cleaning fun, turning it into a game of who could collect the most dust bunnies. Her giggles echoed off the walls, replacing the memory of tears with joy. Look what I found, Anastasia called out, pointing to a small window near the ceiling. Winston helped her clean it, and suddenly a shaft of natural light pierced the basement's gloom. It was like finding hidden treasure. Next came the painting. They'd chosen a warm cream color for the walls, with one accent wall in cheerful yellow, Anastasia's choice. Winston lifted her onto his shoulders so she could help roll paint onto the higher sections. Some of it dripped onto their clothes, but neither minded. These were happy stains, marks of creation rather than destruction. Careful with that roller, artist, Winston chuckled as a drop of paint landed on his nose. Anastasia's laughter rang out like silver bells. While the paint dried, they unpacked the art supplies they'd bought together. An easel found its home in the corner, where the light was best. Shelves were mounted to hold paints, brushes, and papers. A soft rug in rainbow colors brightened the floor, and string lights twinkled along the ceiling like tiny stars. Winston had ordered a special lamp that mimicked natural daylight, perfect for painting on cloudy days. As he assembled it, Anastasia sat at her new art table, already lost in creation. Her small tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked, completely absorbed in her task. Hours passed as they transformed the space. The basement that had once been a prison became something entirely new, a sanctuary of creativity and light. Even the air felt different, fresh with the scent of paint and possibility. Late afternoon sun streamed through the now sparkling window when Anastasia finally held up her finished painting. "It's done, Daddy." Winston knelt beside her chair, his heart swelling as he took in the artwork. There they were, rendered in a child's loving strokes. Two figures holding hands beneath a brilliant yellow sun. The sky was the deepest blue she could mix, and flowers sprouted around their feet in every color imaginable. But what struck him most was the joy captured in their simple stick-figure smiles. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is exactly where it should go." He picked up the hammer and nail he'd set aside earlier, carefully measuring the spot on the yellow accent wall. The picture would be the first thing anyone saw when they came down the stairs. Anastasia watched intently as he hung her masterpiece, making sure it was perfectly straight. When he stepped back, she clapped her hands in delight. "Now it's really our special place." Winston scooped her up in his arms and she wrapped her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "You kept your promise," she whispered against his shoulder. He held her closer, this precious daughter who had shown such courage. The basement was more than just an art studio now. It was a testament to healing, to the power of love, to reclaim and restore what had been broken. I hope you enjoyed that story. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you do not miss out on tomorrow's story. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy.